Hello and welcome to another video in the Age of Mythology Learn to Trigger Intermediate series. This is our first challenge scenario. So in basics we had worked examples, in intermediate we're having challenge scenarios. The link to this is in the description so you can download it. So with a challenge scenario, what exactly is it? If you look at the objectives, your objective is given here. So we're going to create a non-repeating random number sequence. We're going to randomize a quest file from 1 to 9. We're going to code each iteration to cause an SPC meteor to be invoked on a square. There's 9 squares there, so that makes sense. You'll see we have line of sight and we have the god powers. So all you have to do is get in the scenario and do the triggers accordingly. I say make the triggers as you would normally in the ungrouped section, and then afterwards maybe have a look at the trigtemp and try and create your own trigger that does it in a more efficient fashion. So I'll leave it there for you. Have a pause of the video, download this map, have a go, see what you can come up with. So this is my solution now. So I'm just going to copy this one here, and this is going to use questvarception. So I'm going to do this all in one trigger. I'm going to have it high priority, looping, and I'm going to set it to run every 150 milliseconds here. I'm going to randomize a questvar. I'm going to call it target from 1 to 9. Then I'm going to use questvarception to add 1 to a questvar called questvar, and then a number afterwards, and the number will be equal to the questvar of the target. If that questvar is 1 using conditionals, it hasn't been used before, because if it's been set to 2, then it's happened again. I will then invoke my god power and end the condition. However, we now need to figure out which square to use to invoke the condition. So I'm going to temporarily open that up again, and I'm going to code 9 iterations here. So what am I actually checking? I'm checking the target. So if the target is 1, I'm going to invoke the space meteor god's power on square 1. I'm going to end that, and then I'm just going to go through this 9 times and do the rest of them. So I've just copied that 9 times, and I've made sure I've put 2 ends at the bottom because I have 2 brackets open. There's a bit of a nicer way of doing this, which is detecting if this has happened and if not looping back, but because this happens so frequently, we've got our solution to this challenge. So you'll see that the meteors are coming down and they're affecting all the different squares. There's a little bit of a delay there, but eventually they're all coming down and all 9 meteors have been invoked and we've won the challenge. So this is the trigtemp file, the printout of the raw trigger code that I just used to complete the challenge. So you'll see we're randomizing this target questvar, and we're using questvarception up there, and then we've just got our conditionals, and if that condition is met, we're invoking meteor. That's it. If we go into type test and copy the code for questvar randomize, what we can do now is have a questvar randomize with no repeats. What I'm going to do initially is copy over my trigtemp code exactly, and every line is going to need a commands tag to tell AOM to initiate a command, because you can't just paste raw trigger code like this into your trigtemp. So let's do that now on each line. This is going to do exactly what it did before, so the parameters in this trigger are a bit useless. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the questvar target, and I'm going to replace that with the parameter quest file name. I'm also going to look at these random values here, and I'm just going to leave it as they are for the time being. I'm not going to have any numbers on the end of that one, otherwise it could get a bit nasty. So if we save that one, what will happen with that one, if we have a trigger of this name, is it's just going to quickly meteor all those squares. It's just using exactly the same code. I haven't really made many changes here. The only change I've made is the name of the quest var. Okay, so you'll see now if I use a looping trigger of quest var randomize no repeats and just leave it at that, it's going to be exactly the same code as last time. It's just going to run very fast and meteor. But this doesn't really work as a randomize with no repeat trigger. In order to do this, we need to take a closer look at the trigtemp and see what's going on. Okay, so I've copied from the trigtemp and just put the trigtemp with command codes on each line into this trigger here. That's how it's worked. This doesn't really fulfill the brief of the name of the trigger. All I've essentially done is create a trigger that's got all my conditional effects and all my meteors in. And this is a fine way of doing things if you want to prepare a trigger yourself before you copy it into your type test file. That way you'll know the code works. However, this doesn't really fit what's going on the tin. So to do that, I've made my own trigger. I've got rid of all of this and I've made something that fits the brief here. This is what I've come up with. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to delete the command lines from all the command tags, and I'm going to talk through what's been happening. Don't worry if you don't follow this immediately. This is still quite high level stuff and probably belongs at the end of this series, to be perfectly honest, rather than at the early stages. So you'll see I've got my effect name here, I've got my parameters, the quest var, I've got a minimum value and I've got a maximum value. So thinking through what this is, I've got 100 minus 1 plus the ordinary 0, so I've got 100 potential randomizations to go through. So what I'm doing is I'm checking the difference here, so this is going to be 99, and if that's greater than the number of unique values minus 1, then I know that we skip straight to the end because it's an if-else statement and say there's no more iterations, you've already randomized and you've got every single possible iteration here, so nothing further for the trigger to do. If that isn't the case, and I have still got numbers to randomize, then we're looking at what's happening here. So I've set my own custom variables here, but just by putting them in like this. So I've got a check ball, which is set to false, and then a loop while check is false, and everything in this bracket here will loop until check is true. So if we've got options what we can randomize, we're essentially going to find one and we're going to loop through until we find one, which is what I'm doing here. So we're randomizing, we're using quest varception to see if we've got this number before. If we have not got this number before, then we can set our random quest var to itself plus 1 to say we've got a new value here. We'll set our check to true, and then this just happens. We've randomized to a new number and then we can use it. If this statement is false, so we've used this number before, it's just going to loop back round and carry on for the while loop. You need to be very careful when you're using while loops, because if you don't have breaks in the circuit, this could easily loop round to infinity and cause AOM to freeze and crash. So that's essentially what I've done here, and I've just put command codes on each line. I've used C data in this one because I've got this symbol here. I've used C data in the chat because it's coloured chat. So this is a functional new trigger I've written which will randomize the quest var but never repeat that value. Let's see it in action and see how we can use this. Okay, so I'm back in our challenge scenario, and let's just do a sanity test of this trigger to make sure it works. So we're going to randomize this file from 1 to 100. I'm going to send a chat out to say what the quest var actually is in orange. So using our code, we're breaking the string, reinstating the string, 1 times integer conversion, quest file get, quest file name. So that's going to loop around continuously. Let's see what it does. So you see we got a nice string of numbers there, and it eventually completed 100 loops, got stuck at 88, said there were no more numbers to randomize, and then it just stuck at 88. So if we look through this, it is indeed 100 separate numbers that are all different in a random order. We can test it again and get another random order, and there's no repeating in this sequence at all. So that trigger is functional, that trigger is working. Let's now look at it in the context of the challenge. So if we randomize between 1 and 9, this time going all the way to the top, you'll see we've got all of these 9 numbers in a random order, and we can use this as a custom trigger solution to this map. So what we can do with this one is we can set the timer on 250 milliseconds, we'll loop it round, we'll randomize between 1 and 9, and now I've got the arduous pleasure of recoding all the meteors, because I didn't include that in the code, and it's just a new way of doing this. So let's do that now. So hopefully now that meteors have been coded, we can now see the fruits of our labour and win the challenge. Off camera I made a slight change to this trigger. So what would happen is after it finishes iterating, say it finished on 9 for example, it wouldn't randomise, it would keep the quest file at 9, so it would cause another meteor to be invoked, which would lose us the challenge in this context. So now, once it finishes randomising, it gets set to a value 1 less than the minimum value, so nothing outside of this range can be used. Let's see it in action. There we go. So you see every time that trigger was called, it randomised a new square in sequence without repeats, and we got no more iterations at the end and a slight delay while the meteors were flying. That's our first challenge complete in the Learn to Trigger Intermediate series. I'd say if you didn't understand the trigger that I've just made on how that works, don't worry. If you look back through the data types, it should start to make more sense. The main thing is, if you managed the challenge on your own with conditional effects and you didn't get any repeating, well done. The aim of this scenario is to get you to think about certain scenarios and how to set up your own triggers when you're writing them. Now, we've gone slightly into some expert territory here in the form of XS user code, so I'm actually going to cover that one in the next video. Get ready, I'll see you then.